Hey everyone, welcome to Reddit Readout. Today we are checking out Rules Horror. Story 1. The 2055 Good House Husband Guide Rules for the JTGND program. A place to share scary stories which contain a set of rules to follow. The first time I laid eyes on Eve, she was covered in blood. Don't worry though, not all of it was hers. I'd gone for a late night run and she was staggering down the street. She was barefoot, sporting a floor-length gown and a busted lip. I'd thought she was mugged or something. Stopping dead in my tracks, I crossed the road and slowly approached her, so as not to scare her further. "Hey, are you okay?" I asked, concern coating my voice. Seafoam green eyes peered up at me through thick, dark lashes, a nonchalant smile tugging at her lips. "Yeah, why? You see a damsel in distress and think that she just had to be saved, huh?" I rubbed the back of my neck, awkwardly sputtering out a couple words before I gave up and sort of shuffled in place. "Sheesh!" she exclaimed, her smile morphing into a smirk. I was only teasing. A small, awkward chuckle left my lips before I noticed the huge gash in her side. A worried expression slowly settled over my features, my brows knitting together as I said, "You've got a little something." My voice trailed off as I opted to just point in the direction of the blood that continued to bloom a bright crimson red just beneath her gown. She nodded, holding her hand to the wound, applying a bit of pressure to it before saying, "It looks worse than it is." With a shrug, she used her other hand to swipe a bit of blood from her nose. "Besides, I've got so much adrenaline coursing through me right now, I can barely feel it." I didn't believe a single word she said, and I'm sure the look on my face said so. This caused her to speak up again. "Should have seen the other guy," she joked, tucking a piece of matted blonde hair behind her ear. For some reason, she was trying to lighten the mood, so I decided to just leave it alone and not ask any more questions that I probably didn't want the answers to. Despite offering to call an ambulance, she refused. So instead, I helped her into my apartment and got to work on tending to her wounds. Needless to say, that night I learned how to successfully stitch up a wound, and made a new friend. After that night, Eve and I continued to keep in touch. We started out as friends. For about 2 months, we would hang out every weekend. Her favorite thing to do was go axe throwing. She was frighteningly good. Somewhere between all of that, both of us realized that we had unintentionally fallen for one another, and a year later, we were married. Our honeymoon lasted a week, and only a day after we arrived back, did I realize just what I'd gotten myself into. Heck, at that time, I don't think I even knew the full extent of it, but I was in for a rude awakening. Before Eve and I were married, we almost exclusively hung out at my studio apartment, and I guess I just never thought to ask any questions about her place. I'd always just assumed that maybe the reason she hadn't ever invited me over was simply because it was messy or small or out in the middle of nowhere. Only one of those assumptions was right. Her house was so clean that it appeared as if no one lived there. It was incredibly spacious, but it was indeed out in no man's land. When it came time to move, she graciously extended the offer to help me break my lease, and since her home had more than enough space to house the both of us, I happily obliged. The decision was a no-brainer. Eve's place was all sleek, clean lines and modern technology. The best way I can think to describe it is that it looked like something straight out of a sci-fi movie. Equipped with large floor-to-ceiling windows, a solar-paneled roof, a state-of-the-art security system, and fingerprint entry door locks. In fact, there were enough cameras encasing the outside of her house that I'm sure it would put any type of FBI surveillance to shame. Although I found this all a bit odd and thought it was a little much, I decided not to comment on it. Instead, I just reminded myself that before me, she was a single woman living on her own. I guess you can never be too careful. But nothing could prepare me for the things I would find out about her later on down the line. The very next day was when Eve finally decided to spill her secret to me, or at least she tried to. "Babe, you mind if we sit down and talk for a minute?" Her sweet southern drawl tugged me from my thoughts. Pausing the game, I noticed her hands perched on her hips as she stared down at me with an expectant gaze. I tugged off my headset and turned off the PlayStation, nervously following her into the living room. Something felt off. With a brow raised in quiet curiosity, I took a seat beside her and waited for her to elaborate. Listen, I know I've briefly mentioned that what I do is sort of classified information. She paused, studying my features before continuing, almost like she was testing the waters. And it still is, but I think it's only fair that you know that I'm a part of something called the JTGND program. My hand absent-mindedly fidgeted with one of the stray strings on her decorative pillows before I spoke. And, am I allowed to ask just what exactly JTGND is? Sucking her bottom lip between her teeth, she thought for a moment before deciding. She shook her head, reaching a hand out to stop my fidgeting, her thumb rubbing small, soothing circles over the top of it. Do you remember when we met? She asked. Meeting her gaze, I raised a brow and said, of course. How could I forget? More specifically, she paused, clearly trying to figure out how to word it without saying too much. I could see the wheels in her head turning. I was covered in blood. Yet? I questioned. I remember. What about it? Well, she started, the whole reason I looked like that is because I was on the job. My eyes slowly roamed her face for an answer that I wasn't sure I wanted. Who the heck did I marry? Don't tell me. My voice trailed off. Was she some sort of assassin or vigilante or something crazy like that? I've told you enough. Her voice was nonchalant, but I knew she was trying to brush off the fact that this whole situation made her slightly uncomfortable. She didn't want me to think any differently of her, but in all actuality I was terrified. Biting the inside of my cheek, I thought about how I might answer that for a second before I nodded my head and said, I've heard nothing. Best to play it safe. Make her feel like she isn't some type of monster before I know for sure. Interestingly, I watched as she relaxed a little, those words seemingly lifting a weight from her shoulders. I gripped her hands within my own, brushing my lips over the top of her knuckles before meeting her eyes, both of us nodding in silent understanding. That was a year ago. I've learned quite a bit since then, and I've discovered the answer to my question. So, all of that is to say, I decided to write all of you a little guide so that you're not as surprised as I was coming into this. If you're reading this, you too have married a woman that belongs to the JTGND program. Please read through my letter very carefully and take all of my words into consideration. Trust me, this will save you a lot of grief further down the line. Good evening, gentlemen. Congratulations on securing your position as a house husband in the JTGND program. While your wives are away providing for the family, there are several things you should keep in mind. Please know that you are very lucky to even be in this position, and that if you don't agree with any of the rules or regulations stated below, your wife's wrath will be no one else's fault but your own. As you know, all of your wives work a very demanding job. Although you do not have the security clearance to know exactly what they do, please know that it is in your best interest not to know or find out anyways. Please read over the rules below very carefully, and try to follow them to the best of your abilities with no questions asked. 1. Have dinner ready every night, regardless of whether or not you know what to cook. Your wife is going to be hungry when she arrives home from work. Bowls of cereal, peanut butter, and jelly sandwiches and microwaved cups of ramen are prohibited from ever gracing the table, and are a sorry excuse for your lack of cooking skills. It would be in your best interest to at least learn to cook a casserole or two. My wife's personal favorite is green bean casserole, heavy on the crispy fried onions. On the off chance that your wife is out late and returns in a state of disarray, heat up her dinner and make no comment on her appearance. If you do happen to say something out of turn, immediately apologize and hope that she shows you mercy. 2. Express a little pride in your appearance. I feel like this one should be sort of self-explanatory, but alas, I'll clarify what I mean for any of the chads or brats that may be reading this. I'll even translate it in a language that you all can understand. Bro, put on a pair of clean underwear. No, turning them inside out doesn't count. Just pull yourself together and remind her why it was a good decision to marry you and not her ex, Ryan. She has just come home from work, probably had a hard day, and the last thing she wants to see is a cheetah-stained shirt. TLDR, just don't be a slob. The only time a shirt is allowed to be even remotely stained is if you are ever called upon to help your wife dispose of a trash bag, tightly wrapped tarp, or any other suspiciously wrapped object. Once again, do not ask questions, simply do as you are told. 3. Limit and clear away the amount of clutter in the house. Since you're at home lounging around, the least you could do for your lovely wife is to help keep the house clean. No woman wants to come home to a dirty or disorderly home. Vacuum the tacky crumbs off of the floor, put the toilet seat down, dust, mop, do the laundry. While we're on the topic of laundry, bleach is your best friend. It is also your wife's best friend though too, so always keep 2 bottles on hand. Also, if she is ever to come into the house with her clothing drenched in some unknown red substance, be sure to dispose of it in the burn barrel in the backyard immediately. 4. Prepare the children. Not many of you will have children, but on the off chance that the program allowed you and your wife to have one, take a few minutes to be sure that they are presentable. Comb their hair, change their clothes, and have them wash up every day. If your kids ever question where mommy is or ask what she does when she's outside of the house, simply tell them that mommy is providing for the family and that's all they need to know. As they get older, they will begin to question this. If your daughter starts asking questions and wanting more detailed answers, bring this up with your wife and send her to the program for future training. On the other hand, if your son starts wanting more detailed answers, teach him to keep his mouth shut, obey orders, and not to question authority ever again. 5. Make her comfortable. There are going to be some days that your wife comes home exhausted. Sometimes she may have wounds, bruises, or achy muscles from dealing with a particularly difficult client. Some of them can be quite unruly. Maybe try running your wife a warm bath, offer to tend to her wounds and help her unwind for the night. Mine likes to eat olives while she binge watches American Horror Story or John Wick while I rub her feet. Remember that your wife is special, and that you are incredibly lucky to have her. Never complain to her about your petty issues, and try to understand the indescribable amount of strain and pressure that her job puts on her. Keep in mind that anything you do during the day is a piece of cake compared to what she does, and that you basically relax all day waiting for her return. Now it's her turn to kick her feet up and enjoy what you did. Peace and quiet. 6. Engage in interesting conversation and listen to her speak. The last thing your wife wants to hear about when she gets home is a bunch of nonsense. Do not bother her with conversation about how you and the boys played Halo and crushed a BTB, or played Spartan mode during a bot match. Despite your big achievements in the game, they will never amount to any of the things she does, and she really doesn't care to hear about it anyways. In fact, let her speak about her day first. Good husbands are good talkers, but great husbands are good listeners. All the very best. Clyde Venuxi. That's all for today. Please don't forget to like and subscribe.